Welcome. Thank you for coming. As Josh pointed out, I'm from American Express. My name is Charles O'Keefe. I'm running the enterprise monitoring tools and an engineering team that does automation. I've been in this role for now for about 3 years. I ran an organization that is the prepaid platform of American Express Serve for the first, 9 years. And when I first came into this role, I was tasked with, all right, let's put together a strategy on what monitoring should look like at American Express. So I did, like anybody would do, you just kind of do a discovery. You kind of figure out what's available out there and what technologies we have, what the landscape looks like. And I don't think that this is probably unfamiliar to a lot of you if you look at it. So today's landscape, as Josh was pointing out, is there are some of the core stuff that's still out there. There's virtualization platforms, there's standalone applications, there's the onset of cloud, there's public and private cloud. You got all versions of that, and PaaS, IaaS, SaaS, databases, you get the drift. So it makes it for a very, very complex thing that you have to monitor, right? In a distributed application, you might have applications that are spanning multiple different teams, right? So each one of these might be managed by a separate team. You might cross boundaries of infrastructure on those management silos. So as you can see, what ends up a transaction that might end up looking like this, right? Where your customer is coming in, could be coming in through a managed services that you don't have any idea about, going into public or private clouds, going into standalone. At some point or another, it probably hits a database where it does its CRUD operation and then ends up getting back, and all in a timely manner that's expected from your customer. So the challenges are great, especially when you might have, in our case, we had many tools that were out there in the hundreds, and sometimes multiple implementations of those same exact tools that had no visibility across the boundaries. So it makes it difficult when you're in a tiered event or something like that to actually to solve the problem quickly. So what I was tasked with on that is to solve this problem. In my mind, what comes to mind is in a strategy, what we want to look for is an ecosystem of tools. I think that Josh sort of mentioned it here with the CI/CD pipeline. It's an ecosystem of tools, and I think we've all come to realize that that's the case. Much the same way is going to be with our monitoring tools, because there is no one tool that will solve all problems. And people have built their careers around specific tools, so there's passion behind those, and we have to account for that as well. We wanted to change the focus of our monitoring, the way that we did things, and go towards a more customer-focused manner. Rather than just monitoring our infrastructure and our applications, we wanted to put the customer first and understand what that customer was feeling. All backed by AI. I know it's the buzzword here, but we've kind of been on this journey for 3 years. And then the next two, training and culture, I'm not going to talk too much about right here, but we're going to talk about at the very, very end about the lessons learned. Those are extremely important in this whole transformation. And then, of course, data quality. Can't begin anything without data quality. So some of the tools that you might, or the options that are available to you, obviously, this is probably no shock again, logging, tracing, metrics. There's infrastructure-based tools. Each one of these has probably an open source version as well as a COTS-based version. And there is a plethora of each one of them. And if you start chasing technology, you're always going to be chasing technology. So you have to kind of figure out what's right for your organization and how you're going to go about that. Now, the decision that we made in American Express was not to necessarily prevent anybody from trying to use any particular tool that they wanted to, but we would kind of bring it all together in some standards up front as well as in the back of how we would actually paste all of this stuff together. Some of this stuff has been difficult, some of it's been a little easier, and we'll talk about that in a second. So as we're going through this, when I start talking about no one tool can solve everything, and what I mean by that is what you'll find in some instances is where logging might be a perfect tool to actually give you that dashboard and visibility To some applications, it might be a horrible way of doing it at scale when you're trying to do real-time monitoring and dashboarding capabilities, just because of the very nature of the size of infrastructure that you might have to have. Metrics might be another choice. When you're doing tracing, you have to start thinking about is that some teams might have APMs in there. Some people might be doing tracing under their own with message IDs and things like that. How do you do distributed tracing across the entire stack? So a lot to think about, but there's no one tool that will solve it all. When I talk about customer journey, one of the things that we strive to do is to break down every single business capability that we have into a dashboard, right? So if somebody is coming through doing a bill payment, we want to break that down into the multiple channels that it can break down and into the streams of the distributed transaction that it would be, and understand exactly what the customer journey is. And we do that by answering the questions of how many times did I do something in code, how fast did I do it, and what was the outcome. And with that data, you can start doing a couple different things. You start, number one, speaking the same language with the business. The business side of your organization doesn't care that container on this VM is running high CPU or the heap is whatever. It doesn't matter to them. What matters is how many transactions have I lost and what's the impact. All that other tech stuff is for us to kind of, as operations and as development, to understand and fix. So what we wanted to do is create the transparency and give the visibility to everybody that this is our SLA and this is what we can expect out of our applications. Again, putting the customer in mind. Now, when we start doing this stuff, and I think that it's important to note as a use case, when you look through this, you know, when answering the questions of how many, how fast, and the business outcome, looking at how many times it did something. Let's take a registration, right? Everybody probably has a registration in your organization. Page of that is, if I expect to see 500 transactions today at 10 o'clock on Wednesday, because yesterday I had 500, and the day before I had 500, last week this time I had 500, I can pretty much bet I'm expecting to see 500 today. But if I see 5,000, that should be detecting an anomalous behavior. It might not be anything malicious in nature or anything wrong. It could be maybe marketing put a blitz out. But the pattern is that we alerted on it and we investigated it. It's a cultural change and it is a behavioral change that we have to get into to start thinking about that. If I look at how long something took, in a highly distributed environment, you might rely upon third-party vendors. You might rely upon applications in which you don't control. Knowing how long something takes from get to point A to point B and back is extremely important to start not only troubleshooting, but also giving early warning signals that maybe a vendor's offline. Maybe somebody else is having issues inside of theirs. And then ultimately the business capability. In that registration, if I expect to see 90% of all of my transactions registered as accepted and approved for my customers, and I all of a sudden start seeing 20%, and things start going into pen status, right? There's not an infrastructure monitor in the world that will tell you that the behavior has changed in that pattern. But the customer feels it, the customer knows it, right? And those are the types of things that we need to start gathering either metric data and or log data, right? To intro the next slide, so all of these things, we have all of these tools. We talked about many different infrastructures, many different teams, many different applications, COT space, all that stuff. What I want to do is on my count, on 3, what I'd like for you guys all to do is just shout out your birth month. Is that good? Everybody gonna do it? All right, 1, 2, 3. That's not good enough. What's wrong with these people? What's wrong? Let's try it again. And I mean loud. 1, 2, 2.5. Nobody did it. 1, 2, 3. November. Good deal. Want to stand up? What's his birth month? You don't know. Do you know hers? You don't. Anybody know mine? November. How'd you know that? was louder. It was very, very loud. So that's generally what ends up happening through a lot of this stuff, is that we see events that that are getting processed. Some things are louder. What I expected and what I have had happen before is when we do the 2.5 is that somebody jumps the gun and gets a little bit overzealous and says it. That's your false positive, right? We start talking about these things. When we're going through these at American Express, we get about 3 to 4 million of these events a day. 3 to 4 million. Some of these events have been created 10 years ago, and nobody even understands why. Nobody knows why it was in place. It was probably for some outage that occurred long ago. Nobody wants to touch it, so it's there, right? Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's there. Some applications are well-tuned and only alert or give an event whenever it's necessary. Some are louder, like me. Some are louder, and they get all the attention. But it's those other anomalous behaviors that we want to actually start looking at. So, kind of explains this slide, is all of these tools that are disparate start to create another problem that you have to solve for, which is how do you weed through the amounts of data and all the events that are in there. The way that we've looked at it at about 3 years ago, we started building something internal where we would, it started out something similar to a MOM, if you guys are familiar with the managers of managers and things like that, but we wanted to do something a little more with it, and that was to start correlating events and starting to weed through a lot of those things. So before you start any of these processes, you got to ingest, right? So we built our ingestion pipeline, and we started to normalize the data, right? Creating a standard schema, common information model, data model, whatever you guys want to call it, started creating a standard schema that answers the questions that we wanted to answer. What we found is that the data quality was kind of horrible, right? Nothing was set and standardized, right? So there were some parts we would get that were great data quality. Some of it was bad. Some of the areas that we went to, there was nothing that they could do about it. It just is what it is, right? The application might have been too old to actually make modifications to it. So we spent a really inordinate amount of time, I would say a good 1.5 years, tracking down data quality and trying to fix things, right? Which got us to our next one. Well, what do we do with this stuff now that we can ingest everything and we can put it into our logging systems and kind of graph things, how it goes, and see some of the trends that are in there? We started figuring out, well, with these areas that we don't know anything about, why don't we start enriching it, right? We can enrich log data that's not of a standardized format of logging. Maybe it doesn't have all of the relevant information. A CPU can now mean a CPU. An application can mean an application. Transaction ID or a message ID can equate to a transaction ID. All of those things. We started enriching it from our asset management systems as well as into our CMDBs. And we created a pipeline that there is anything can be possible now of metadata that we can pull to enrich that data, to add context and value into that. So now we have the ability to take in things that we know nothing about and add the context of what that's impacting and where it's coming from in a time frame using unsupervised machine learning in a time base, and then also use that to refine our models later on. So we dispatch to that. We want to get rid of all of that noise, so we dispatch it to deduplicating. Anything that's alerting multiple times, we don't need to see it, right? As Josh pointed out, far too many times we've been working off of tickets. And if we look at how many tickets are in there and how many people actually have to go in and close those tickets, it's just an amount of time that's wasteful. And a lot of times, in our cases, it was tickets that were just repetitive over and over and over again. So now we're seeing somewhere in the realm of folks that have onboarded into this about it's anywhere between 75 to 80% deduplication rate, right? So that's time less saved. We're starting to open up tickets based upon the situation at hand, the things that are going on. We're utilizing, like I said, the unsupervised machine learning to actually correlate those events and then refining the models as we go through to make it better. That is, in a nutshell, how we've chosen to deal with this. I talked about a little bit earlier, culture and training, and I bookended them in this part right here. I think far too often we focus in on the tech, right? And I will be the first to tell you the tech is easy if you have an open mind. tech is extremely easy. And at scale, culture and training are difficult. And when I look at the tech being easy, I think often, far too often, the training, we focus in on the tech training. We don't focus in on the critical thinking skills that it takes to actually change your behavior in the way that you actually look for anomalies, the way that you look at data, the way that you respond to the data. So the cultural behaviors on that, what do they say? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And there's nothing more true than that. You can have the best laid plans, but if you don't have the culture that will adopt it in blameless postmortem and all of those other things that are DevOps themes that we go about, it's just going to die on the vine. Data quality, extremely important. Do not underestimate how long it will take you to get data quality. In any machine learning, corralling the data, understanding where it's coming from, normalizing it, all of that, and getting the data quality will probably be your longest lead item, right? And then always put the customer up front, because without that in mind, nothing else matters. That's what we're here for, is to create that customer value to our customers, the value to our customers, and keep them in mind throughout all this. So with that, I'm probably a little ahead of time. I will close it out and open it for questions.
One is, so when the situation concept, how long are you waiting to determine when it's like a situation, for one, if you care to say? Because you can't, I mean, we're kind of struggling with like, what are the boundaries, right? Do we wait 10 minutes, do we wait 5 minutes, you know? And then my next question would be, are you writing that, developing that yourself, or are you using a vendor tool to do that?
So two parts to that question. Number one, the first answer is how long are we waiting? The ML takes care of that in the backside. So it will, per the policies on how it's the configurations on it, it will wait for 1 to 2 of similar before it actually opens it, but it will open it underneath the context of the first, right? And then start correlating things as it comes into play. We are in the backside, all of the front side of all of that, the ingest, normalization, enrichment process, dispatch, all of that we wrote ourselves. We are utilizing another product in the backside for doing our machine learning.
I think a lot of organizations haven't recognized that yet, that, you know, we first go to the tools because that's what we do in IT, and that changing people is hard. So, I mean, if you had to pick the one thing that you think American Express has done that really kind of pivoted or is starting to pivot people to think a different way, what would you say that is?
So I will speak in the context of my own organization. We've put a lot of effort this last year into our talent transformation, if you will. We've created what we call, it's an internal university, where we're talking about those skill sets that are required. And I think, and it's interesting, when we first originally started doing this, everybody's like, okay, well, we probably need some people that know Java, and we need people that know this and that. We're transitioning from the operations to more of the development centric, but it was more on the cognitive abilities and the critical thinking skills that we wanted people to start thinking things through differently. I will be the first to admit, go-to-market is not my forte. I am a technologist, right? That's what I've always done. So as far as, for me, outreaching into and extending this, we've gone as so far as creating, is getting a third party to help us create training modules in our required training that we have to do every single year. So it's a part of my organization's, which is roughly about 2,200 people. So creating a required training platform that gives you a green belt, brown belt, black belt certification in training. And it starts out at the lowest level of how we want you to think, how you should think about monitoring. And then it starts going into the other tools and things beyond that. I learn best in 2-minute video. I'm not a big reader, so I learn best in 2-minute video snippets. So we created a whole bunch of those based upon products of how you would use the different tools and how you would think about how you're looking at the data. Quick start guides to everything. So there's a lot of it. again, going back to that go-to-market, and we were having this conversation a little bit earlier of how does everybody supposed to know about this, right? When you're dealing with the size of a company of American Express, it's very challenging, right? So, getting into that next level of getting all leadership alignment is probably the next thing that we need to be focusing on.
Never underestimate the value of good marketing.
Yes. Ditto.
Thanks for the great presentation and a lot of insights. And one of the questions that I have is, since we are just embarking on the journey of data quality, how long did it take for your organization, or in terms of the ITOps as such? Because the scale at which you deal with is like humongous when compared to what we are. So just wanted to understand. So
let me ask this, Troy in the back. How long ago did I come and talk to you about the product that we were developing? About 3 years ago? Yeah. It was 3 years ago. And then I went away for about 1.5 years to 2 years. Yeah, check your email. We fixed the glitch. Don't worry about that. So it took about 1.5 years, 2 years. There's a lot. So to understand that, you kind of first got to figure out what it is that you're looking for in all of this data, and then what can you pivot off of. And then start really chasing down the different data elements of that. It's not an easy thing. I think that in one of the previous conferences they were introducing ML, and that was one of the first things that they talked about is data quality. And we were in the midst of all of this, and we're like, yep, got that.
thank you.
So it's a journey, and I will say this: the core ops, although you're having to transition to this stuff, this is the new way, right? So the things that we're doing today are going to impact us in 5 to 10 years from now. It may not have an immediate impact right now, but the way that we think about stuff of yesterday, we have to be thinking about it in the new way. So machine learning and all of these other things, it might be a buzzword now, but it will be just part of our normal everyday life.
So machine learning, kind of by definition, it's learning about past behavior, right? How much are you finding yourselves able to actually rely on machine learning, and how much of it is old-fashioned kind of eyes on glass, looking for patterns that a human might spot? Sort of where do you see things on that continuum of the hype versus reality?
So there's a couple different things. So how many people are familiar with machine learning at a basic level? And I would talk about supervised versus unsupervised, right? In our unsupervised machine learning that we have, there is more of a hit, but there are more false positives in some of that. Where we are able to enrich our data, and the data quality of the information coming through, which is probably, I would say, a good 70% of all of the information coming through, we get about a 60% hit that this was, or 70 to 80% hit that this was, done. So refining that, it's not a one and done. You have to continue refining that because things change, release over release over release, things change. There are some pilots that are being done inside where we are testing out how to do an automated refining of that. Right now it is somewhat, I would say, eyes on glass, but somewhat manual of linking two things together and then creating the model out of that. So it is an evolution of continuing to do that, but there's a little bit of both. Don't underestimate the need to actually continue that. That's part of that pattern of critical thinking, of looking at data differently.
Okay. I want to follow up. So, and we're talking about kind of, internally, good marketing, selling this kind of upward and outward. Do they see this as something new, or they're like, oh, Charles has got a new monitoring tool. That's great. It's better monitoring. Or do they see it as adding a net new capability or sort of something additive to the business? Or is it just they look at it as it's better? Is it incremental to them, like it's better monitoring? Or do they see it as, oh, there's a net new thing going on in technology that's going to help us do something in the business?
That's interesting. That's an interesting question. And a little bit of marketing on this, and I will say 3 years ago, whenever I started pitching this idea, it was the latter. This is going to make everything better. I think that the luster may have worn off in a time frame of that data quality. And as a former colleague of mine used to say, is you're looking at your calendar, the leaders are looking at their watch, right? So setting expectations is going to be extremely important to you. Didn't know what we didn't know that it was going to take that long, but now that we're actually starting to see some of the fruits of our labors of the previous stuff in the past 6 months to 7 months, I think that there's a lot of more optimism, and other folks are coming in on board and seeing the value of that. So it went through a peak and a valley where you go, all right, are we really on the right track on this? Is this really something that we should be going after? And I think that over the course of the past 6 months, it's kind of been revalidated for us and given us a little more energy to continue driving to that next level.
So Charles, you said two things that I thought were, you said many things that I thought were extremely valuable. Good to touch in on you said that the business doesn't care where the app runs and what it sits on, the technology. They care about transactions loss, customer impact, business impact. And you also said that they're looking at their watch while you're looking at a calendar. With everything that you've done and with what you just responded to him, like, what do you present to your leadership? What is it the things that, from the transition of what you used to do to what you're now doing for presenting information to leadership?
If I had an answer to that, I'd probably be a lot further along. Right now, so this year, I will say part of our goals of this year, and I think Jim on my team back here can attest, I have very little tolerance for new initiatives inside of what we're doing. It is roll out what we've got and get people on board. A lot of so here's part of this. When you start down this path, a lot of people that you talk to just won't even understand what it is that you're proposing and how to even think that way. So you have to kind of, in some instances, go out on a limb, create something, and start to try to show. Right? So a lot of the stuff that we've built has been our feedback to ourselves of what it is that we think is important. But now I don't think that that's a right way of doing about it. We want to get people on board. Tell us now what is wrong, what it is that if you can see the way that our vision was that transforms the way that we're thinking about this stuff. And mind you, there are pockets probably in your organization that are very good at this stuff. They're very, very good at this stuff. And there are pockets that probably not so good. I would get with those folks that are really good at that stuff and have them help champion this with you. It's one thing that I don't necessarily think that we did very well at the beginning, but it can also help sing your praises and get you to, as a collaborative and collective whole, to where you want to be. Right? Don't operate it in a silo. Right? I think that we probably, as a lesson learned, may have done that a little too long on that part while we were still trying to figure things out. So that would be a suggestion. Right now, it's just all about driving stuff forward.
Awesome. All right, we got time for one more quick. Perfect. It's like on cue. I love it. You guys are great.
What would you say your biggest ROI is when you made this change, and did the business agree with your biggest ROIs?
So I'll start with assumptions. Your assumption is that your ROI is going to be your mean time to detect and your mean time to resolution. If you adopt a behavior of not opening up incidents for each alert, the efficiencies gained just in the net of how many tickets you close an hour is what we say it was 85 to 90% deduplication rate. So that's 90% of the tickets that we don't have to open up. You're looking at 200,000 tickets a month that get created. That's quite a big savings. So what we thought was actually going to be the return on investment of doing this, we found a bigger one is just by the cultural behavior change of all of, you consider network traffic and people resources of opening and closing these tickets and actually going in. And if you look at how many of those tickets, and we talked about the 10-year-old tickets that have been opened up, you look at those types of things and rest assured that there's probably tech debt behind a lot of those things. And Lee here can talk to you all about tech debt. But there's probably a lot of tech debt wrapped around on all of those things that could expose that if we fix this one thing, then we might not have other problems. So what we thought it was going to be, which is mean time to detect, that's what we were really going after in our enterprise command center, our eyes on glass, as he was talking about. It's really starting to be more in our service operations, as well as some of the customers that we've taken in on with our development teams, and the efficiencies gained that they get back in their day.
So does the customer realize that ROI as well and agree with your ROI finding?
So let's define customer. Throughout the talk, we talked about customer as being external. What I just referred to as customer there is my internal.
Right.
I think that it's hit or miss. Again, conceptually, people don't want to take away from what they've always done. So it's hard. So there are times where folks are still not wanting to make that transition of doing that, and it's a leap of faith. So it's again, getting that 1 or 2 teams on there that can help sell your praises to see it. People are at different various teams. We've got some very progressive teams that have gone full head on into it, and are seeing it and agree with it. And there are some teams that are just, they're apprehensive, right? Which is understandable. I think that change is difficult. Change is difficult for some folks.
All right, well, thank you very much, Charles. A round of applause for Charles, please.